Hi, welcome back to our series on human resource management. Today we're going to be talking about change management. Anytime we form an organization to meet market needs of some sort or another, change is going to be inevitable. Markets change, economies change, consumers change, technology, everything changes. Which means the organization and the people in that organization need to change as well. And change is not always easy. So today we're going to talk about how we change as an organization, how we change as people, and how we can do this effectively. So with that, let's jump right in. Okay, so let's talk about change management. So one of the images I really enjoy when it comes to change management in an organization is it's like changing a tire while driving. And this is just a really apt description of what we're up against because organizations have to change. That's just a reality, a constant. As they say, change is the only constant. Nevertheless, the organization can't stop doing what it is supposed to do to accommodate the change. So it needs to keep going even while it's changing. And sometimes this really can feel like changing a tire while driving. But it's going to happen, so let's understand what it's all about. Let's first look at different types of organizational change. So one type of organizational change is what we call static change. And this is when something happens definitively at a very specific point and almost instantly. So for example, if the organization changes a policy around, say, dress code, well, yesterday the dress code was this, they introduced a new policy, so next day the dress code is that. It's an instantaneous change. There was nothing gradual about it. It was definitive and instant. On the other hand, we also have something called incremental change. This is change that kind of happens and develops over a period of time following sequential steps. Now, there is an end to this change, but it might take quite a while to get to that end. So for instance, if the company or organization is building a new building, maybe building a new campus, the company might be moving in departments and employees and functions over a period of time. You might be in some temporary office space for a while, and then after a few months, the first floor of the building is done, so you move into the first floor, and then after a few months, the second floor is done, so you move into the second floor, and so on and so forth. So in this case, what we see is incremental change taking place over a period of time, but it does eventually end. That brings us to dynamic change. Dynamic change is constant change. It is ever evolving, never ending, constantly taking place in the environment. It never starts, it never stops. It's just happening all the time. So, for instance, think about software that you use at the company. It's always changing. They're always modifying it. They're always putting in upgrades or functions or features or patches and so forth. And it feels like you are constantly trying to learn the software over and over and over. And by the time you start to get a bead on it, they change it again. It's never ending. With all this in mind, let's look at some of the reasons why we tend to resist change. First, sometimes we're just plain complacent. We really like the status quo, and we don't necessarily see any need for change. We're comfortable in our situation. I just assume things keep going the way they are. And this can bring about a sense of complacency across the organization. There's also a sense of conservatism that comes into play now and again. Oftentimes we are very loyal to the traditional ways. The way, this company started as X, Y, and Z, and I'll be darned if it's going to do anything but X, Y, and Z. I'm loyal to the past. We follow these traditions. We have resources in place that the past has helped us build and nurture, and we want to safeguard those resources. And why on earth would we invest in change when we've done so well following the traditions of the past? And this works until it doesn't. Okay, history is replete with industries that kind of held on to the old ways and refused to recognize that things were in fact changing and were unable to adapt to the new changes. We may also be very conceited in the way that we do business. We may feel that the way we do things is the very best way. We know all the best practices. We are the industry standard. We are the industry benchmark. Other companies wish they could be like us, but they're not. And this, in turn, makes us blind to our weaknesses. If we think that everything we do is the best, then why would I spend time looking for weaknesses? I don't have any. Now, organizations can also come up against unclear direction from leadership. And so if they don't know what's happening or lack the skills or knowledge necessary to adapt to the change, they're going to resist it. They may not necessarily see the need because organizational managers have not done a good job communicating the need for change. So that motivation, that impetus to change may be lackluster. And that brings me to inadequate or unclear communication of what the change entails and why it is necessary for the organization. If I don't know what the change entails and I don't know why it's necessary, and you're giving me unclear goals and expectations, then I'm going to resist change. It's pretty natural. We also resist change that really challenges our raison d'etre or our reason for being. Sometimes we are so expert in our particular niche that when that expertise in that niche is necessary and important, we're kind of a big deal because we're the ones that provide that service or product. On the other hand, if that service or product is no longer needed, if the expertise that I bring has now been obsolete, that kind of throws me into an existential crisis. If you don't need me for this, then why do you need me at all? Because this is all that I am. This is all that I know and do. And if you don't need it anymore, I'm in trouble. And that's a really rough place for an employee to be. So they perceive negative effects on their interests, and it challenges their cultural and personal identity within the organization. And so they experience discomfort with uncertainty and a lack of clarity as to what is expected. Another reason we may resist change is because we disagree with it on ethical grounds. We may feel that the nature of the change proposed runs counter to who we are as a company, and that it is not part of our culture and value set, our vision. So, for example, a company may want to change a benefits package. Well, some folks may say, you know what, the nature of the change you're proposing, it's just not who we are. This is not the right thing for our company. It is unethical. That brings me to disagreement with the nature of the change. Sometimes we all agree that change is needed, but we do not agree on the nature of the change, what we should do in terms of a solution. Now, sometimes there could, in fact, be a lack of conviction that change is needed, but more often it's belief that a specific change or a specific direction is inappropriate. Or maybe we feel that the timing for this particular change is wrong, or that, okay, the change is fine, but it is being mismanaged. And so these are reasons that we may resist because we feel that the way it's being done or what's being implemented is the wrong direction. Now, we can see this, for example, in politics quite a bit. If you look at the conservative and liberal side in, say, perhaps healthcare or the cost of prescription medicines, they all agree that change is necessary, but they profoundly disagree on what kind of change is necessary. Finally, maybe the organization and its employees are just plain tired of change. As we said earlier, change can be a constant, and that can take a toll on the employee population. So they may still be, reacting to experiences they had in previous changes, or the cumulative effect of all these changes is just too much to bear, and they just become disengaged from the change process. So when we really think about all these reasons we may resist change, it shouldn't be a surprise at all that we do in fact run into resistance. So let's take a look at what this resistance may look like. The first type of resistance is what we call active resistance. Active is, it's clear, it's in your face. You know exactly what the person is doing and how they're resisting, and they're very upfront about it. Now, in this case, with active resistance, there's both constructive and destructive active resistance. Constructive active resistance is when employees and people involved in the change, the stakeholders, are discussing the change and debating it and negotiating and really getting into the guts of it. They may not like the change, they may be resisting, they may be wholeheartedly against it, but at least they're in the room discussing and challenging and trying to find solutions. On the other hand, there is destructive active resistance as well. This is when the people are still in the room, but they are ridiculing. They're highly critical, very ugly criticism, not constructive at all, very negative. And furthermore, they're recruiting, meaning they're kind of going around the room and around the organization looking for people to bring into their camp to kind of create this critical mass of employees to resist the change, but not for constructive reasons, for destructive reasons. Now, those are all active ways that we resist change, but there is also passive resistance. Passive resistance is really dangerous because unlike active resistance, this is done under the table, behind closed doors, and, behind smoke and mirrors. It's when employees and people in the organization agree verbally that the change is necessary and to embrace it, but they do not follow through. Maybe they fail to implement the change, or they procrastinate getting around to doing what they agreed to do. Later, they may feign ignorance. They might say, "Oh, I didn't know I was supposed to do that." No. They knew, but they didn't want to do it, so they didn't. And later, when challenged, they feigned ignorance. They may withhold information that is important to making the change successful. So if they run across some information, they'll withhold it. They may not collaborate with other members as the change requires, and so they kind of stay to themselves. And finally, maybe they just stand by and allow the change to fail so that they can say all along, "There, I told you so." And in this case, there is actually something they could have done to help the change be successful, and they saw the opportunity and they chose not to act on it, and they allowed it to just kind of wither on the vine. Okay, so far what we've done is we've looked at the types of change, we've looked at why people resist change, and we've looked at how people resist change. All of this means that for an HR department, well, these folks have their work cut out for them because they need to find a way to overcome this resistance and speak to the concerns of those concerned and bring about this positive organizational change. Now, there's a lot of ways that companies do this. One that we're going to look at here, just one of many, is the 4 generic phases of change implementation. In the first phase here, we're engaging in change. This means that we are evaluating their current business and defining a compelling vision for the future. People will be much more likely to embrace change if they see a future that benefits them, kind of a what's in it for me, if you will. And so if we can define and communicate a compelling vision of the future, one that has positive ramifications for the people in the organization, they're going to be more likely to support the change. Then we make a case for this change and we engage with the stakeholders. You know what? I'm going to do a completely different video on engaging stakeholders because this one is so important. Take special care to make sure that all those with a vested interest in the project are on board. In phase 2, we're preparing for the change. We're establishing a governance structure to make sure that it is implemented well and that everybody knows what's going on. We want to map out the change and bring together the necessary resources to be successful. And this is key. Prepare people for change with ongoing communication. Communication is absolutely key. Once again, separate video on that one, because the more people feel involved and informed and part of the change, the more likely they are to embrace it. In phase 3, we actually deliver the change. This means develop Pathfinder projects to introduce the change as pilots and quick wins so people can get a taste for what it's like in really good, quick, easy, positive ways. Create symbols of change, clear results, and wins resulting from the change. Things that we can hold up, medals and flags we can hold up and wave and say, hey, look at this. We got this as a benefit of the change. If we got this small thing as a benefit of the change early on, imagine what we're going to get long term. Take people with you, their hearts and minds. Don't just feed them data and spreadsheets. They need to know in their hearts and minds that this is the right thing for them. Once again, what's in it for me? And then ensure that the business keeps working. Remember, changing the tires with the car flying down the freeway? We want to make sure the work keeps going. Finally, in phase 4, we're sustaining the change. It's not enough to just make the change. You need to make sure that the change sticks. Because if we don't pay attention, it's just going to go back to the original default mode. So we need to manage the total change. This includes developing sustaining mechanisms and metrics to reinforce the change. How are we going to measure success going forward? How are we going to reward success going forward? If we're asking employees to change, then when they actually do what we've asked them to do, we need to recognize and reward them for that. Remember the rules of business: what gets measured gets done, what gets rewarded gets done. And finally, ensure that the change delivers the promised outcome. We said at the beginning that if we do the change, we're going to have this fabulous future. Well, let's make sure that it's actually delivering on that future. All right, there you go. So now you have a better understanding of the types of change that an organization may encounter and how people may respond to this change, and most importantly, what an HR department can do to help bring about positive change. I hope you enjoyed. Stick with me. We have a lot more to go over in human resource management. Until then, have a fantastic day.